Wednesday.
Hey, how you
Hi,
doing?
Gigi. I
Hi.
am very well. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Really excited to talk to you this afternoon.
Me too. And for anyone who is joining us live or even replay, we welcome everybody. Tell us how you're doing, how you're feeling. Happy Wednesday. I can't believe it's Wednesday again already. Very
Yes.
excited for the conversation we're about to have. Obviously, the specific focus for the month around diversity and inclusion. And I mean, I know we're going to have a specific piece, but for anyone who hasn't met you yet, who hasn't been lucky enough to meet you just yet, tell us more about you and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a leadership coach and I work with leaders who are really looking to increase their impact and influence in what they do. So specifically around whether it's their visibility, whether it's around their decision making, whether it's growing and scaling their teams. Leadership is such a diverse topic. And particularly if you come into it for the first time, really getting those right foundations in place are really, really key. And then I also work as a kind of leadership development consultant where I work with organizations to help them around their leadership development programs. So looking to see how can we increase the impact and the efficiency and the effectiveness of our leaders. That can be anything from how they recruit their teams, how they develop their teams, how they, coach and develop in that way. So really exciting. I love leadership. I've always loved leadership. And I think it's such an important focus in an organization that leads to this overall success of the organization.
I mean, so many keywords that resonate core to my heart, 100%. Obviously, the core of today's session is all about, inclusive leadership on its own. But before we go into that, I feel like you said it yourself. Leadership is such like a broad topic. I want to dive a little bit more about what does leadership look like? Because to give you some context, I don't know if it happened to you, but some of my clients, for example, do not necessarily consider themselves leaders until they are managers. And I
Mm.
don't think the title should define how much of a leader you are. So it's definitely something I was keen to unpack with you, have your views on it. How would you see leadership? How would you describe leadership?
Yeah, so many people do think that, and they think that I haven't got a manager title, so I'm not a leader. But actually, everyone is a leader in some sort of capacity. So even if I wasn't a manager right now, I'm a mother, so I lead through raising my children. In organizations, if you're an individual contributor, for example, you're a leader for the fact that you're driving through projects. You have to influence others. You need to get people to get on board with what you're doing. You need to be able to communicate effectively. So if you look at leadership in the terms of what the skills are, pretty much most people are leaders, but they don't see themselves as leaders because they haven't got that title. And I think that one of the things that's really important when you're thinking about your development is how can you start showcasing those leadership qualities before you have a title? Because there's many people who do have the title of manager, but they're not leaders because they don't know how to build that trust
So
with
true.
people. They don't know how to inspire others, and people who work with them, and don't enjoy working with them. And there's people who don't have titles who people follow because they love what they're doing. They feel good when they're around them. These people are really clear with where they're going and their vision, and you can follow people like that. So the title is titles are sort of lagging indicators in some respects. You can be a leader right now where you are, what you're doing. There's somebody who's possibly looking up to you and inspired by what you're doing. You're leading them. You're inspiring and influencing them.
I'm so glad you shared that, and I feel like you're spot on. So anyone listening in, wherever you are when it comes to your career, don't necessarily stick to the title. Just think about what are your objectives are, and you probably are already really a leader, whether you know it or not. So yeah, thank you for that. On that note, if we were to open this to inclusive leadership, vast topic once again, but I mean, this is what you said. I think you've posted about this conversation we're having on your feed, and you said, we need just more leaders who are empathic, who are, kind, who are vulnerable as well. So let's just unpack the whole topic and why we're here today. And I'd love to have your views as to what have you seen, for example, what are the conversations that you've been having either with your clients or organization when it comes to inclusive leadership, and what does it look like?
Yeah, no, good. I mean, let's start with the definition. If you go to Google, there's a whole bunch of definitions around what inclusive leadership looks like and is. And they all sort of touch on the same thing. But I'll just read one out that I really like because it sort of speaks to what we've been talking about. And it says that, inclusive leadership is that capacity to manage and lead a heterogeneous group of people. So, people who are different, because we're all different, group of people efficiently while respecting their uniqueness in an empathetic, bias-free, which is really key, way. And it's a real authentic leadership style, okay, that rules out discrimination, bias, favor based on color or race or other protected characteristics, and allows employees to feel valued for their own input. And so someone who's an inclusive leader is actively looking to seek out and consider different perspectives. They recognize that they, in collaboration with others, they recognize that to make great decisions, it's not something that you do in a silo, and they want to kind of do that in a really open way, basically. So if you talk about characteristics of people who are leaders, you've touched on some of those things. Inclusive leaders, they are empathetic. They're very self-aware, because I think that's really key in being able to address your own bias. What's my own background, what's my own story and journey to get me here, and how does that influence how I view the world? They also are people who recognize the importance of communicating, being able to communicate at all levels to all people, be able to collaborate at all levels with all people, and recognizing that building that safe space for their teams is really important. You might hear the term psychological safety, which we use a lot when we do leadership development, but essentially people feel that they can be themselves, they can open up and admit when they've made a mistake or they don't know something and they've done something wrong, and it's safe for them to do that so they can grow and learn and continue. So there's so many aspects to it, but I think an inclusive leader starts with like the introversion, is that right? Looking inside themselves and understanding, okay, where am I starting from in this journey, and what kind of leader do I want to be? Because wherever you go, you're casting what we call a leadership shadow, and you're either casting a positive shadow where people, they look at you, you're modeling these great behaviors and that you're modeling how things should be done, or you're casting a negative shadow where people don't really subscribe to what you're talking about. It's very negative. It's not very something that, if we clone 10 of you, we wouldn't want 10 of you, if that makes sense.
It does, 100%. And I love what you said about the leadership shadow. And I know, for example, some of the clients that sometimes came to me with challenges is that they want to be an inclusive leader themselves, but they are in an environment that doesn't necessarily allow that. Like you said, some people who might have the title manager, they actually are not leader for various type of reasons. So I'd love to have your views, because I know, so for example, something I talk a lot with my clients is to say, even if the environment, for example, is not working, what is it that you can do that is within what you can influence? So potentially like the team who you managing yourself, or even like the other, I don't know, departments that you're involved with. And obviously, because of the core of what I do, it usually involves, we just have to find you another company, another job to work for. But I would love to have your views as to what do you think could be put in place if you want to be an inclusive leader, but you're in an environment that is not necessarily 100% supportive of that yet, if I can put it this way.
Yeah, great question. So there's different things you can do. If we start like right at the beginning, one of the roles as a manager might be recruitment. Okay, so you're bringing people into the organization. There, first and foremost, you can start with being an inclusive leader and looking to see the people that we're bringing into the organization. Are we bringing in new diverse, bringing diversity into this organization? Are we, are there any biases in how we recruit and the things that we're doing? And how do we make sure that we're really creating a place that people want to come into that welcomes, differences in individuals, first and foremost. And then the second thing is, when you're in an environment that maybe not there yet with certain things, this is where being a leader and a pioneer and kind of leading the way can come in. So you're thinking about, okay, what are my values and what really matters to me? So being really clear on that. This is where the self-awareness piece is really key. Really understanding the people that you're working with. So great leaders know their teams. They know the motivations of the people that they manage. They understand their backgrounds and what they're about. And if they don't understand certain things, they seek to go and understand. So there's an element of curiosity. So you could have a group of individuals, different ages, different backgrounds, life experiences, all that sort of thing. In order to lead them well, you do need to know them and you need to spend that time to get to know them. So it's looking at that. It's also thinking about, okay, how do I want to communicate as a leader with this team? What's my approach going to be? And so inclusive leaders, they are leaders who, communicate openly and frequently. They're transparent. So they're they don't have any issues of saying, look, I don't know this right now, but I will go and find out. Or, this is what's happened. And it's not discussing that sort of elephant in the room situation. That's really important. Other things I would say is that as a manager, you are creating what Simon Sinek calls it the circle of safety in your team, where your team knows that my manager has got my back. So if I make a mistake, if I don't do something well, and I've owned it, and it was something I need to learn from. I'm not going to get fired tomorrow unless it's something like gross misconduct. But you don't understand. They know that they can make mistakes and it's going to be safe. That's so important, because when people are working and they don't have that circle of safety, their energy, their mind, where they would ordinarily be focused on the work that they're doing, is spent worrying about, like, if I make this
The
decision,
consequences of 100%.
Exactly. So rather have them do that, you set up from the beginning. Like, I've always been a leader that's like, I trust all of you implicitly 100% from day one, until you give me a reason not to trust you, because I feel like we're all adults, and I'm very much kind of like, here's where we want to get to, here's what we want to do. I don't mind how we get there, because I would trust you to do that. But I also recognize that you might not always make the right call. But I also believe that you would have gone through lots of things in your mind to make that decision. And we'll figure it out. We always figure it out. And so that then gives, my team the confidence to go out and make those decisions, or go out and do that thing. Because again, when we talked about, you said this missing key to greater results. When people are not making decisions, they're not moving forward. When you're afraid to fail, you're not moving forward. So the ability to keep growing and perform high, be high performing team, is that element of, we have that trust, and we're working as one team, and we can do all of that. So I think those are things really important. And then I think modeling the way. So if you've got other managers in your organization who are not there yet, you showing them what that looks like. So when you're making decisions, how are you bringing people in? When you're showcasing information, how are you doing that? Because sometimes, again, I use the analogy of parents and children. Children learn from what their parents do, less so than what your parents say. So a lot of your influence can come from demonstrating how this looks like, so others around you can see.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to unpack everything you've just said, because this is the beauty of it. I mean, you're a coach yourself. I feel like it's almost in the blood, in the DNA, to just share a lot of practical, either example or tips that would make sense. And you've just did all of that right now. So I feel like I could have taken notes myself and just like be ready to just run. But obviously, I'm not leading in a specific team. The one thing I would say, and my takeaway from what you shared, among many things, is what you said, especially at the beginning, when it comes, two things is, first of all, the self-awareness piece. I think, like, obviously it's 2023, we talk about these things, but I feel like even though people are aware, they have to be aware, they don't necessarily know how to be aware, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know, like, a very sort of basic yet super efficient exercise I do with my clients is the values. It's one I did for myself when I realized, oh my God, like, this is just not working for me. This corporate life is just so misaligned with who I am, right? And you've talked also about the importance of, like, knowing your values, for example, and that might help with the decision. But do you have additional practical either tips or things that have in mind when it comes to tapping into that self-awareness piece, and then really helping people to truly be aware of who they are, and then therefore where they need to go?
Yeah. So you've mentioned a great one about your values and knowing what you stand for. I also talk with clients and managers around knowing your own operating system. So if you think about a computer, there's an operating system of how it functions, how it works, and everything sits within that. As an individual, as a leader, I have my operating system, meaning, like, I know how best I work. I know how I manage my energy. I know my strengths. So again, knowing your strengths is really important as a leader, and also knowing your weaknesses. So Strengths Finder has been an amazing tool, things like DISC, all that sort of thing, Strengths Profile, because when you know what you're good at, you can operate from that place and harness it a little bit more. And also, when you know what you're not so good at, rather than spending lots of time in that space, you find ways to mitigate against it, to strengthen it. And not to the point of going from like a 3 to a 7, but just recognizing that this is something that is a weakness for me. So how do I support that? So going to do some sort of strengths test to sort of understand your strengths is really, really important. Another thing is having a bit of reflective practice. So as a leader, you're working, you're doing things, you're achieving things, and it's very busy, and it's very easy to finish one week getting to the next week. But one of the things that helps you to grow is to hit pause on a regular basis and look back and say, okay, what went well? Because again, sometimes we can forget the good things that happened. You might have had a really difficult conversation with someone and it went really well. Or you might have been able to, something that wasn't going so good now is going so good. So reflecting on what went well, what didn't go so well and why. So there's this thing of like something has happened, and I love a good retro. Like I retro everything. So even if going on holiday, so whenever we go on holiday or do things, I will retro it, because the next time I do it, I'll go back and see what I wrote to make it better the next time. So doing that on a regular basis, and I have a weekly reflection practice where I ask myself 5 questions. So like, what went well, what didn't go so well, what's been challenging, and progress on my goals. In light of that, what will I do differently next week? And then kind of what support do I need? Those questions, very simple questions. You can jot them down, you can write them down. It helps you to just hit pause, but then be able to know what you need to do next. Because as a leader, that's the challenge of growth. You're not looking at yourself, you're looking at your team, you're looking at what they're doing. But unless you are taking that step with yourself, then you might find yourself repeating the same mistakes. And then you can take that information and sit with your manager, if you have a manager, as well, because again, there'll be people who look and see and give feedback. And I think that's the final thing. Ask for feedback. So from your team, I would always ask feedback from my team, like what can I be doing differently to support you? What's going good? And ask for feedback as well from your manager as well, because then they can give you insight to things that you might not always see. And that just gives you that full picture. There's this tool, you're probably aware, Johari's window, where we're going from like things that we know ourselves, things that others know about us, things that we don't know about ourselves and others know about ourselves. So it's that piece of like those things that may be in our blind spots that we may not see as well, to be able to bring them into kind of full view. And that helps us as well.
Oh, I love it. This is why I don't drink coffee. So, I mean, 100% agree with all you said. And I feel like just to build on that, the grounding yourself, I think, is really key. I mean, I love what you said about the reflection. Obviously, I had my hands up when you were sharing yours. I do daily reflection on this guy. Where is it? It's here. So daily reflection on this guy. Like one thing that happened well. So like you said, when sometimes we have tough days or days that just didn't go as planned, it's so easy for the brain to be like full on mode, just focusing on the negative. So I feel like the reflection side of things is really interesting. Like I feel like, yeah, grounding yourself is super key. And as a leader, as an inclusive leader, I think it's a fantastic tool that you can do either through reflection or other tools. But like you said, also the feedback is so important, because again, to me, it goes back to the same thing, is that we get stuck in our own head. Like this is just how we programmed to go. This is what we were talking about, the reflection. And I feel like the feedback is exactly doing the opposite, in a sense. Like you said, it's about asking others how they perceive you, or maybe share some things that you either know or you don't know about yourself. And again, bringing that sort of 360 angle, which I love. So yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. Just as you were speaking there, another thing that just came to mind, 2 things. One is, as a leader, it can be quite easy to operate in silo. So having either mentors or coaches who can give you that different perspective is really, really important. And also when you're a new leader for the first time, and let me actually go back to, let me use the word manager actually, because leaders can be leaders all the time. When you're a new manager, for example, you don't know what you don't know. So talking to others who are ahead of you to get their perspective just really helps, because then it stops you making some of those mistakes, and allows you to sort of prepare yourself for what's going to come, because it is going to come. And then the second point I just wanted to make around this sort of feedback and self-awareness piece is that you will make mistakes. That's the thing. And if you recognize that, then you can be a bit more confident in the decisions that you make, knowing that you will make mistakes as a leader, but it's what you do with that that matters. Give an example. There was a time when I was interviewing someone for new roles. They weren't successful, and I had to deliver the news that they weren't successful. It's an internal role. I think it was like probably the second time I've ever done that. And I remember doing it, and I didn't do a good job of it. The person was crying. I don't think I really got the message across well. When I came out of that call, I just felt that didn't go well. I really wanted to really reassure the individual that, we still think they're great. We still think there's opportunities. Just right now wasn't the right thing. And, coming out of that situation, I went to my manager at the time and said, like, I didn't do a good job of this. How do I fix this? And how do I do it again? She was great, gave me advice and gave me some tips, kind of scripted a little bit what I wouldn't say so I didn't forget the key things. Then I messaged the person and said, can I call you? Can I speak to you tomorrow? And did the whole thing again. And left that conversation. She messaged me after and said, thank you so much for doing that, because it really showed me that value that the organization and XYZ. And again, leaders have been able to, being an inclusive leader, because it's about empathy, putting yourself into the shoes of the other person, recognizing that you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with people. So
Absolutely.
you need to always remind yourself of that, particularly when you're asking people to do more, give more, all that sort of thing. And people recognize that and appreciate that. And then they will work harder for you in the future because they know that you care for them and you matter to them.
I'm so glad you shared that example, because so many times again we hear the stories about how people have either made redundant or not successful for the role and how it
Mm.
went wrong, or what didn't work. But I'm so glad that you shared your example of, you know what, sometimes it's okay to just not get it right the first time. It doesn't mean that you can fix it in, the other way around. I feel
Mm.
like it's courageous in a way, but at the same time, I think it's what needed. And I think this is actually going back to the second point I took away from what you shared earlier, which was around sort of like leading by example as well. Sometimes we just don't have to talk, we can just actually make sure that whatever is it that we're doing, it actually inspires people in terms of their own respective way. And I feel like inclusive leadership definitely is that. It's just sometimes about making sure that wherever the situation is at is just doing the things that are needed to be done, right?
Yeah.
um and the second thing that I thought was important to talk about, because you touch base on that but I feel like we need to expand, is for me it's the balance, to get the greater result, because this is what we're here to talk about today, is the balance between being able to be self-aware, to be grounded, but also to be open to your blind spots and so on, like we've just talked about. But like you said earlier, it's also about having that capacity to always move forward, not
Mm.
to say doing things for the sake of doing things. I mean, we've talked about that, the two of us, just before this conversation. There's no point for that, but making sure that there is a space where you feel like you can actually do things, sometimes even make a mistakes, but that's actually okay, either because you're a leader and then you're providing that safe space, or you are into that safe space where you can actually do these things yourself. Like, I feel what you touch base on is super, super key, because to me, I mean, when I'm seeing all of this content out there about the gender pay gap, the recruitment process being biased, still having some minorities who don't have access to the full extent of what could be their career, as you can
Mhm.
see, I'm like very emotional about these things. And I'm like, how can we change that? And by doing things differently. So I feel like the whole moving forward piece that you touch base on is like super key. Anyone listening to this is, how can we actually do things differently, or how can we just take a step forward to help get the momentum going? Sorry,
Yeah.
as you can see, I'm very passionate about that.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree 100%, particularly, diversity in teams, and leadership, because representation matters. When you're running teams and building teams and scaling teams, having people who look like you matters, having people who understand you matters. And when you are an inclusive leader, part of that sometimes is doing the hard thing. It's also speaking up for what isn't, what you deem to be right and is not happening. It's challenging things. So where, maybe an organization has talked about, well, yes, we're working on increasing our diversity of leadership in our leadership team. A year later, 2 years later, the diversity numbers haven't moved. It's holding them to account as
Mm,
well. What's happening? What are you doing? It's not a case of like, well, it's Black History Month, let's go and do some fun things for a month and then back to what we're doing now.
mm,
It's actually, what is the long-term goal here? What's the strategy here? And I think for leaders who are really clear on what matters to them, what matters for the organization, and able to kind of bring those two things together, that's where sometimes the magic can happen. So in my previous organization, diversity really mattered to me 100%. So within my sphere of influence, whether it was setting up, an ERG and getting that in place, or setting up community programs for people to develop certain skills, or just connecting with people from that, from my same demographic, because I recognize that they're will be going through certain things or feeling certain things. There are ways where you can make a difference. I really believe everybody can make a difference if they want to. Now, if you imagine lots of little ripples of effect of people doing lots of different things, that will have an overarching impact on an organization. But to your point, you mentioned with your previous client, if it gets to the point where you're doing all these things and it's not changing, then you ask the question, is this a place where I want to be? But there's so much data out there, and it's about how having diverse teams influences the results you get, influences the impact the organization can have. So it just seems so strange that you wouldn't be seeking to build a diverse organization, which comes from, recognizing that we want teams that are inclusive, we want teams that recognize and celebrate difference.
Absolutely. I love that. And I feel like at either personal, team, company, CEO level, wherever it is, sometimes the fear of change can be like holding a lot of people back for a lot of variety of reasons. But like you said, there is so much data out there that actually shows like there is so much power in, you know, bringing a different perspective, people from all gender, non-gender, you know, age, whatever it is. There's beauty in that. So I feel like we have to celebrate that. And I feel like you said, I'd like to encourage anyone who's listening to this thinking about the different things that they have to do, either for themselves to work on that inclusive leadership angle, but even about what their company should do. I mean, this is obviously March. It's about Women's History Month, but like you said about Black History Month, it doesn't have to be that month. It actually is a conversation that needs to happen again and again. So is there anything that you can commit to, not yourself, you don't have to carry all of this on your shoulder, but is there any specific, I don't know, event that you can put together, conversation that you can have on a regular basis with whoever is on your team that could actually help you to just deliver that initiative of bringing either, you know, more people, like you mentioned about the recruitment side of things, or just even in terms of the way that you work, bringing more empathy in terms of how things are being done. Anyway, you've got the idea. Point is, we only have a few minutes left. Time flies when you're having such important, purposeful conversation like this. So any final thoughts, words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Oh, any final thoughts? Yeah, I mean, this sort of thing is often simple, but difficult to do at the same time, in the sense that, yes, there may be barriers. Yes, you might be busy. Yes, there's lots of things going on. And sometimes diversity falls to the sidelines when actually it should be front and center. It should be the foundation of whatever we do. But I love the things that you've been saying are just around, just choose one thing that you can commit to. What's in your control as a leader, as a manager, that you can do today? So whether it's how you run your team meetings, whether it's how you decide to communicate, whether it's how you decide to, you know, make decisions, how you recruit, these are things that you have influence over that you can start to change today. And you know what? Change is one of those things. Like 3 years ago, pre-COVID, everyone felt, you know, you had to be in the office. You had to be in the office to do great work 5 days a week. But we've all seen how that's not true. And so a big part of this is showcasing what is possible and what can be the new normal. And yes, you may have to be the pioneer for it in the first instance in your organization, but keep talking about it, keep beating that drum, because change is coming, it's happening. And you know, over time, people are recognizing that this is so important. And I don't believe you can be an effective leader if you're not an inclusive leader. You just can't. So it starts with ourselves. But yeah, what's one thing you can do today?
There we go. I think we'll leave it at that. So anyone listening to this, what's the one thing that you can do today? Obviously, feel free to let us know. We'll be keen to find out. Thank you so much, Chichi, for your time today. It was a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure to join you. So good to talk.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Bye.